hear me okay?
Hey folks, good evening. We're just going to wait another minute or so for everyone to get on. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll get started probably in about 1 minute. I will mention, please feel free to put any questions in the chat or the Q&A. We will get to those at the end of the event. My name is Becca Cato, and I'm the Director of Racial and Social Justice for YWCA Delaware. So glad to be here with you guys. All right. The event's being recorded, so if you don't get to stay for the whole thing, that's okay. Want to go ahead and thank our sponsoring organizations. Obviously, Delaware Center for Justice, Tide Shift Justice Project, and YWCA. And then I'm going to go ahead and introduce Meryem to you. Meryem's the Executive Director of Tide Shift Justice Project, a local nonprofit specializing in policy, research, and litigation aimed to reform Delaware's criminal legal system. As part of her role at Tide Shift, Meryem co-coordinates the campaign to end debtor's prison, which began in 2019 as a volunteer group working to decriminalize poverty in Delaware. Before Tide Shift Justice, Meryem was a staff attorney at Juvenile Law Center. Prior to that, she was a Delaware public defender. She lives with her family in Wilmington, and she is going to be our moderator this evening. So I will hand things over to her.
Thanks, Becca, and thanks everyone for being here today. So I know I personally hate bragging about myself, so I'm going to start off by bragging about the panelists we have with us today. So first up is DeRay McKesson with Campaign Zero. DeRay is the executive director of Campaign Zero, which is a social justice organization leading nationwide structural change to create equity and justice in our criminal legal system. Campaign Zero has led a project analyzing the monetary thresholds across the country for when theft and shoplifting are charged as felonies versus misdemeanors, and advocates for thresholds to be regularly raised to keep up with the rising cost of goods and inflation. Also with us today is Tiffany Anders. Tiffany is an assistant public defender. She currently heads the family court unit statewide for our public defender's office, before which she supervised the office's young adult unit. She has experience representing clients of all ages and truly all ranges of crimes, but her passion is providing counsel to young people. Also with us today is Barbie Fischer. Barbie is the Restorative Services Director at the Delaware Center for Justice, where she's managed their diversion programs for youth and adults since 2019. In that role, she oversees mediations for eligible cases that are referred from our Delaware courts, including misdemeanor shoplifting, which take up a large bulk of her caseload. I can speak personally to that being true. Ms. Fischer has relationships with several retailers in the area as a part of her diversion work, including a partnership with the National Association of Shoplifting Prevention. She also truly holds a rare position of being highly respected by both prosecution and defense communities in Delaware. Lastly, with us today is Dr. Claire van den Broek of Huxley and Hiro. She co-owns Huxley and Hiro, which is an independent bookstore in downtown Wilmington. If you haven't checked it out, you should. She will soon be opening a gift shop in the Hotel DuPont, Little Huxley. And later this year, Huxley and Hiro is moving just down the street on Market Street to a new location so that the store's old location can become a retail incubator called Made in Delaware, where they will help launch other retail businesses. Claire is spearheading this project in collaboration with Launcher, Wilmington Alliance, and the Newcastle County Chamber of Commerce. With that, I figured we can kind of kick things off by defining first what we're here to talk about. So Tiffany, if you don't mind kicking that off, I was hoping you could kind of set the tone for everyone by letting folks here know when we talk about retail crime, what specific crimes are we talking about under the Delaware Code? What is retail crime?
So when we're talking about retail crime, we're talking about charges like shoplifting and organized retail crime. So for shoplifting in Delaware, it's exactly what you think it is. You know, taking something from a store, you don't actually have to complete the crime to be convicted of it if you have the intent to complete the crime. The threshold amount of products is $1,500. So if the amount in products taken from a store is less than $1,500, it's charged as a misdemeanor. If it's greater than $1,500, it's charged as a felony. Then we have organized retail crime, which is essentially defined in the code as taking more than one would for their own personal use. So the idea with organized retail crime is that folks are taking things from stores to then turn around and sell. So that's the difference between the two offenses we think of when thinking of retail crimes.
What is the typical punishment in Delaware for any of those crimes you just described?
Probation.
Okay. And what about, like, how, in your experience, what does it look like when someone's charged with shoplifting versus when they're charged with organized retail crime?
So anecdotally, with organized retail crime, it's more co-defendant situations. So if you're charged in a group, and again, the amount of things that you're taking. So if two kids, for example, go into the Wawa and take some candy and some chips, that's going to be charged as shoplifting. If the same two kids go into Dick's Sporting Goods and start taking armfuls of jackets off of a rack, that's more likely to be charged as an organized retail crime. I will say, though, I haven't seen any juveniles charged with that. I've had adult clients charged with organized retail crime, but no juveniles. They're typically charged with shoplifting.
That makes sense. And DeRay, if we could turn to you next. I know your work has a national focus. How did Delaware's laws compare to other states' laws? And in particular, the threshold that Tiffany mentioned about $1,500 being the breaking point between a felony and a misdemeanor. How does Delaware size up?
Yeah, we were interested in this a few years ago because we couldn't find an analysis of all the states. So we did it and we looked at all the thresholds across the country. As you know, obviously Delaware is 1,500. When we look at peer states, it looks like Maryland updated their threshold rather recently, which is a good thing. And theirs is 2,500, which is high and good. They updated in 2016. And Pennsylvania is 2,000, which was updated in the year 2000. And the lowest in the country is also in this region, which is New Jersey, and it was updated in 1978, and it is $200, which is the lowest in the country. So we have always been very disappointed in New Jersey, and we are proud of states that have high thresholds. And we think Delaware's is right in line. If anything, we are pushing for people to make them higher, not lower. And the studies that we've seen by Pew and others have showed that there's no relationship between lowering the threshold or raising the threshold, for that matter, and an increase in theft. None of the thresholds that we have studied across the country are indexed for any cost of living adjustment. So that is a challenge. So what was $1,500 when Delaware changed its laws? Things cost more than that today. So we do advocate for people, if they're going to change the law, to index it to something probably a little more progressive than inflation. Inflation actually doesn't get us to where we want it to go, but that is what it looks like regionally. 1,500 we think is a solid threshold and is in line with the peer states, New Jersey notwithstanding.
Okay, I did not know that about New Jersey. Just one more opportunity to dig on them. I love it. Now, of course, we're here because there's been a lot of talk in the news about retail crime, and in particular, this story of there being an uptick in retail crime. Can you walk us through that conversation? And I think some of the false information that's being peddled, especially on the national news platforms, about retail crime?
Yeah, I mean, it's what we've never seen. Most of what we've seen is like police narratives with like a single theft, and that is extrapolated to be the trend in the region. We've never seen data to support this idea that the threshold has any relationship to an uptick. And what we often find, like even when I saw some of the press around Delaware, there are these PowerPoints that suggest something, and then you're like, well, what's the backup data to that? And it's low and clear. We saw a PowerPoint that was, or a deck that was from Delaware that the police put out, actually, that showed that these thefts were actually going down. So we were sort of like, why are people trying to raise the threshold if the police's data is suggesting that the thefts are going down? So we have always been confused. If anything, the retailers associations, which what we have seen across the country, have led this conversation. So they have had videos of people stealing in a Gucci store or something like that, and then it becomes this like, we need to raise the threshold. And this, our data has shown, and this national data has shown, is that the most commonly stolen things are like food, and it's not, you know, Gucci purses. So we have seen that be actually something that is like misled people across the country. And the last thing I'll say is that in almost every state we work in, no legislators know what the threshold is. They don't know when it was set. They weren't here when it was set. They weren't part of the conversations when it was set or updated. And when we go to them and say, you know, should you go to prison for stealing an iPhone? They're like, no, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. And we're like, yeah, we think that that also doesn't make a lot of sense either, right? Or we use other products that aren't luxury goods, like how much formula would you need to buy to get to the threshold, right? Which is like what people are stealing is baby formula. And we're like, you know, we don't think that should send you to prison either. So we haven't seen any hard data to suggest any good relationship with these thresholds, or that the crime is actually increasing.
And it sounds like you've actually seen the opposite, that you've seen data that crime is not increasing. Is that right?
Yeah, so you know, Pew did an incredible study that showed that both increasing the prison sentences doesn't reduce these crimes, but that there was no relationship between increasing the thresholds and an increase in crime. People thought that if you are like, the police were like, if you increase these thresholds, people will understand that they can steal more and they will steal more. And, you know, that is not what people are thinking about before they go steal things. So it just didn't happen. The data suggested otherwise, and that was good. So we hope that there are more studies that confirm this across the country, but Delaware was included in the Pew study that showed that there was not an increase.
And I'm going to try to be fancy here. Let's see if I can pull this off. Hopefully that worked. We'd talked about this study before, and this is my understanding is this is the chart from that Pew study that goes over specifically Delaware's, when Delaware raised its felony threshold. Is that right?
This is correct. Yeah, and what you see is that when the $1,500 threshold was introduced, if anything, you know, it certainly didn't increase. If anything, it decreased. So just a reminder that there is no relationship between increasing the threshold um, and people choosing to commit the crime. And we just cannot imagine that for this amount of money, the threat of prison is the appropriate accountability for people.
Okay, I think I have one more chart from here. Let me try to be fancy again. Okay, there we go. Can you walk us through, I think this is the same Pew study. Can you walk us through what we're looking at here?
Yeah, Pew was one of the early leaders in helping states actually change the thresholds to be more progressive. If you see in the bottom chart, the 200 is the great state of New Jersey, holding it down at the bottom, and then you all are in the top bucket, the 1,500 to 2,500. But what we see here is, regardless of the rate, theft is sort of, it is what it is, right? Like there's no, you know, people suggested that if there were higher thresholds that theft would be out of control, and that actually isn't the case. We see in places with really low thresholds that the patterns are similar. So there is something going on with felony theft, but it is not the threshold.
Thank you so much for walking us through that, DeRay. I always love when there's actually already data on something that's going on. Like we're not in the middle of a study, the study is done.
And I saw somebody ask for the link. I'll put the link in the chat to the Pew study.
Awesome, thank you. I'll also note for folks watching, we will send out the slides, and they're linked on the slides when we send out like a thank you for coming email tomorrow. So I love a citation, no worries, you will get your citations. So focusing back on Delaware for a minute, Barbie, if I can turn to you. I know you're an expert on restorative justice, and the program that you work with, I've had clients go through your program. I am very familiar with it. And but can you walk us through the Delaware Court's restorative conferencing program and tell folks about your work at DCJ?
Absolutely. Can you hear me okay? So we have a very unique law, which actually indicates that all crimes, felony and misdemeanor, juvenile and adult, have to be considered for alternative dispute resolution. What constitutes as those that come to alternative dispute resolution is set by a committee was developed by the law, which includes the Department of Justice, the Office of Defense Services, along with the heads of all of the Delaware courts or their respective representatives. With it, Delaware Center for Justice, one of the only nonprofits in Delaware offers alternative dispute resolution. So we're the primary for the activity. With that, we do restorative conferencing as our alternative dispute resolution, which is more commonly referred to as victim offender mediation. So our goal is to actually, as an alternative to the courts, provide an opportunity for those who have been harmed by crime and those who have been accused of crime, an opportunity to together create a plan of accountability. So how can this person be held accountable for their actions, as well as how can the person harmed be made whole to the extent possible? So with that, we often get retail crimes. Usually we get both adults and youth for those cases. And often the stores will meet with the individual or do a phone conference with the individual or just let us know what they want to see. The primary thing that they want to see is actually something that we provide through a partner with the National Association of Shoplifting Prevention. So the National Association of Shoplifting Prevention has a course called Youth Educational Shoplifting, YWCA. They also have a course on shoplifting prevention for adults. This is done all online. It's evidence interactive. It also includes an assessment, a psycho profile analysis, and a risk assessment, which identifies the personal profile, actions, and feelings of those caught shoplifting. And then the assessment measures their propensity to repeat the offenses and is used to determine which participants may need added additional support in order to help prevent recidivism. So it's a very comprehensive educational program that we are able to facilitate through the Delaware Center for Justice for those who referred to us. Usually we see retailers asking for the shoplifting prevention course. Sometimes they'll also include a continued no contact order as the defendants have been trespassed by the store. They also will often ask for restitution. We do not have the data from the courts on how we compare in restitution repayment compared to if the case goes through the traditional court process, but a case remains open with the courts if it remains open with us. So the case does not get nulliprossed unless the restitution is paid in full. So we on average have restitution paid within 6 months. Where I heard from the courts, it can take years to get restitution repaid. So with that, if we have a case come to us, we reach an agreement. If the defendant complies with that agreement, like I mentioned, it is nulliprossed. So it's NP'd and just dismissed by the courts. So it allows them to then have their records expunged in the state of Delaware.
And just a couple of questions, because maybe it's changed, but this is what I remember. Shopliftings or misdemeanor shoplifting is eligible for this program, but generally felonies aren't. And also if someone had repeated shopliftings, just because I feel like this is going to be like the first question we get. If someone has repeated shopliftings, they wouldn't be eligible for this program. So for the most part, it's first-time offenders, or at least not people who have a like a demonstrated pattern.
Correct. So at this time, the committee that oversees the victim offender mediation contract with the courts has determined that only misdemeanor shoplifting cases are referred to us, and that if this is a second or third offense, then they are not referred. They are not eligible to come to us. So largely our cases are first-time offenses. I think only once have we received a repeat offense. The other thing that is unique about our program is that there are stores that refuse to divert cases, even though our law in Delaware says cases have to be considered for alternative dispute resolution, it doesn't say that they must go through alternative dispute resolution. So if it is eligible for diversion through our restorative conferencing program, a store can say, I don't want to, I want it to go to trial. I want it prosecuted. We then actually still offer the shoplifting courses through the National Association of Shoplifting Prevention that can be court ordered. So it can become a part of a different agreement with the individual and the courts. So some of those corporate retailers where it's just corporate policy, we don't divert, we're still able to offer these services for this educational piece and this assessment to those individuals as well. So we do have several of folks who come to us just for the course, not for the diversion program.
And I love data, and you and I talked before about that course in particular, and that there's actually a lot of data that you collect from it. Do you mind, and I'm sorry, I don't have a screen share for this one, but do you mind walking us through some of the results that you've gotten? I think you'd said it was from the last 2 years of defendants that had gone through the program.
Yeah, so in the last 2 years, the top 4 reasons that youth have said, why do you think you shoplifted? 54% of them said that I wanted it and didn't have the money. 19% said it was to satisfy friends. 15% said it was to see if they could get away with it. And 12% was because they were angry or depressed. So we are definitely seeing the majority of youth who are shoplifting is largely because they don't have the funds for the item that they need or want. In fact, we had a case a couple of years ago where it was a young lady who had shoplifted quite an expensive item. And she met with the store. The store really wanted to know why, because she was very remorseful when they detained her and spoke to her about the case. And it turns out she was invited to a friend's birthday party and she didn't have funds to buy a present.
Oh.
And so she, in order to avoid the social shame of being the only one showing up without a present, she attempted to shoplift. So it is largely that. We've also seen instances where people just forget to scan things at the self-checkout. So I personally, after doing this work for as long as I have, avoid a self-checkout at all costs because there are so many people that they forget to scan something, it's on the bottom of their cart. As soon as it's brought to their attention, they're willing to pay for it, but not given that opportunity by the store. But the poverty line of things also goes over to the adult cases. So it's actually 42% of adults that say that they wanted it and didn't have the money for it. With adults, we're also seeing a mental health component, as 35% of them said it was because they were angry or depressed. So actually, if we add that I wanted it and didn't have the money, the 42%, there's also 20% that say I'm poor and needed the item. So that brings up the poverty to a 62% of adults are saying, I don't have the money to afford what I wanted. But then also we've got that high 35% of them saying I was angry or depressed. So it's largely we're seeing, especially on these again are misdemeanor cases, this is just the last 2 years that poverty is playing a role in people shoplifting. It's also interesting to me to look at that 89% of our youth have said that there was no planning at all going into their shoplifting experience. So this was impulsive. 89% of youth, that number actually goes up for adults. 92% of the adults who have come through our program in the last 2 years have said there was no planning at all in their shoplifting.
Got to be the only time that kids are planning more than adults. So it sounds like the big takeaways are that most people, the vast majority of folks that are shoplifting, both kids and adults in Delaware, that go through your program are doing it because of poverty, essentially, and the overwhelming 90%. It's not a sophisticated Ocean's 11 heist. It's either not planned at all or not planned very carefully. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Wow. Well, we have a couple more stats. So Tiffany, I'll turn to you next. I love when people can dig into things as a part of their job. So, Tiffany, I know you also have a good perspective on trends in this space for the state, and have data about shoplifting and retail crime for clients that have gone through the Office of Defense Services. Um, I will see if I can be sophisticated again. But do you want to walk us through some of the stats that your office was able to put together?
Yeah, so the Office of Defense Services is made up of the Public Defender's Office, which is, what you would think it is, and then the Office of Conflict Counsel. So these numbers are a combination of both of those. The Public Defender's Office represents roughly 85% of adults in criminal cases. And I don't know what the percentage is for youth, but it's very, very high. I would say we represent in the high 90s of youth cases. Every child who's arrested in Delaware is automatically entitled to a public defender or conflict counsel. There's no income requirement. So we represent most kids charged with crimes. And so we were able to pull data about our clients over the last 10 years. And we broke this up into youth cases under 18 when they were arrested, young adult cases, that's 18 to 26, and then adults, we are saying, are over 26. And you can see, especially for youth and young adults, there is no uptick in shoplifting in the last couple years. You can see that it looks like for youth and young adults, things sort of peaked around 2016, 2017. But the numbers have actually gone down. We've highlighted here, obviously, 2020 and 2021. Those numbers are very low because none of us were going anywhere. But the numbers haven't gone up substantially since then.
And can you explain for folks why that 18 to 26 is set aside separately?
Yes. So we like to distinguish young adults from adults because when we're talking about adolescent brain development, we're talking about adolescents up until age about 25 or 26 when their frontal lobe is fully developed. Because we know that this group, because their brain is still developing, is doing more risk-taking behavior. They're more influenced by peers in this age group. And so, our argument as defenders to the court has consistently been they should be treated different than adult offenders. The Supreme Court has recognized this. 25 or 26 is the number that we chose based on brain development. Obviously, Delaware courts, if you're over 18 when you are arrested, you are treated as an adult. But that's why we decided to split out that specific group, because their needs for rehabilitation are going to be different than for adults. That group probably just needs to grow up a little more and they're going to outgrow this behavior. Adults are going to have different needs.
That makes sense. This chart was so striking to me because I know there's been a lot of conversation about an uptick in retail crime in the past year or two, but apparently 2016 was the year. I don't even know what happened in 2016, but that, yeah, quite the outlier.
Yeah.
And I guess this one's kind of both for Tiffany and for Barbie, since both of you are working with so many individuals that have committed shoplifting or accused of shoplifting. What are some of the things in common that you've seen that drive people to this, at least anecdotally? I know Barbie, you had some data for us, but what are some of the common themes that you've seen in the news? We've had these stories of sophisticated smash and grabs. Is that what you're seeing, or it sounds like it's maybe a different story?
Yeah, I can share some of our stories. It's definitely, like I shared earlier, the wanted it, didn't have the money, took it, or a lot of what we see with our adult cases is the simply I just wasn't thinking and walked out with it. There's a couple of cases that stick out to me. The girl that I already shared about, the young lady who stole because of the avoiding shame from friends. We've also had a lot of our use cases are kids who they want an object, their friends are buying it, they can't afford it, so they just try to walk out with it. And then we're also seeing a lot of folks, another case that really sticks out to me is a woman who was actually buying food for her, the memorial service, the reception after the memorial service for her nephew who had been murdered recently. And she had a cart full of groceries, went through the self-checkout and completely missed things. And with that, she offered to pay for it, was incredibly remorseful, but was a very traumatizing experience for her. So when she came to my office, it was like reliving the grief of that day, and just, the shame she had in that she was even, accused of this crime when she was willing to pay for it, and it was a genuine mistake. So it really is a lot of these, impulsivity, poverty, and mental health concerns, whether that's long-term mental health concerns or even just short, things like that. Another piece that sticks out to me is a young mother who had 2 children who worked overnight, and she went to pick up her kids from the nanny after working all night long, stopped at the store to pick up a few things, and again, got to scan everything, thought she had. And then when she was approached about it, offered to pay for it, and wasn't given that opportunity. So it is one of those. We do work with stores and trying to make them aware of those situations so that hopefully they can train their officers that are in store, their clerks in store, that, hey, maybe we let somebody go ahead and pay for it this time. And if it happens again, we can look at that. Someone asked in the chat, in the Q&A, and I answered, but that seems relevant to bring up here, about why stores might opt not to mediate. So it's corporate policy is the #1 reason stores opt to not to mediate, and I have a list of those stores. But then the other reason that they opt not to mediate sometimes is because they've actually caught the person previously and opted not to press charges. So that's where they might not have a criminal record on our end, so they're eligible for us, but that's because the store actually opted to give them a break. So when I'm talking about these cases where people are just being forgetful or distracted and they're offering to pay, the store does have the ability to say, okay, we're gonna give you grace in this moment, we're gonna let you pay for it, but they're choosing not to. So that's where we try to bring that to the store's attention, as maybe it's a training thing that needs to happen with some of their staff.
And Dr. Broek, that actually feels like a really good segue for you as our retail representative on the panel. So you currently run, you're currently a local business owner. Can you tell us a little bit about your bookstore and what policies you guys have with shoplifting or experiences you've had with theft in your store?
Yeah, so we're right on Market Street. It's an area where there are a lot of people with mental health problems, but we're also in an area where we have access to Downtown Visions, which is a nonprofit that walks around downtown, essentially keeps everything clean, but they also have security ambassadors. So we're very lucky to have an alternative to police, which means that if an incident occurs in the store, we can ask Downtown Visions to come and talk to the person, kind of figure out what's going on. If there's a mental health crisis, we can talk to them. So we fortunately have an alternative if we do need to call somebody. We don't have to call the police right away. We do see retail theft, probably less than, for example, a grocery store, and maybe slightly different kinds of retail theft, but the vast majority seems to be connected to mental health. And these are kind of the impulsive decisions that Barbie mentioned before. This could be a compulsion, somebody who just, can't stop themselves. And in the moment, they just take something because they think they're not being watched. And in some of those cases, I've just asked them, hey, I think you may have accidentally put this in your pocket, can you put this back? And while that may not prevent them from doing it in the future, I'd like to think that at least for some period of time, if they're thinking about it again, they might think, that didn't go so well last time, so let's not do that again, right? I mean, it's likely a deterrent just to have that kind of shame in that moment of being caught. And this is what Barbie was saying too about, these people that do feel remorseful, and they may not do it again, or they may not do it again for at least another year or two. And some of them are just, they may not even be aware of what they're doing. People with severe mental health problems. I have a woman who comes in and regularly attempts to steal children's books for her children or grandchildren who are waiting in the car. But she's a homeless woman. She has no grandchildren in the car, certainly. And she just grabs the book and walks out with it. So we just have to stop her and take the book. But there's always some risk involved with that. You can't always expect your retail staff to do that, even if you can do it as an owner. So this can be fairly tricky, but I try to encourage staff to just approach people and say, hey, you may have forgotten to pay for this, and would you mind bringing that up, things like that. And we did have a case yesterday that we were discussing at length of a regular who has purchased things from us many times, and she stole something. We don't know if it was intentional or not, but she attended an event where she actually spoke about how she doesn't have a lot of money right now, and she's struggling to be able to afford things like books, and her mother's helping her out with it, but it's difficult for her, and she was hoping to find a book that was within her means. And my employee helped her find a book. She sat and read that book for a little bit, and then after she left, the book was gone and it wasn't rung up. So then you have a conflict, right? Because this is a regular. This is not someone you immediately want to accuse, for one. It's someone who you may not even want to lose as a customer. This was a very real discussion for us. If someone regularly shops, what might their motive have been, right? Could they have just forgotten? Maybe, but considering they were just talking about their financial problems, maybe not. But also, do you want to just shame them afterwards? Do you want to involve police? I mean, we can pull a camera footage and involve police if we can, but is that an outcome you want? Because ultimately, I think a lot of the problems that we see, both as retailers and then all of the people in the process here, what happens after someone is arrested, is that there's a lot of short-term thinking. I mean, what do you want to happen short term, right? I mean, do you want someone arrested and do you want to stop the theft? Yes, because you're a small store, you're thinking, hey, one book gets stolen, that could wipe out a whole day's profit, right? I mean, you may only have 5% net profit in a small store. So one book stolen could mean your whole day of sales is wiped out. But at the same time, think about this long term, right? What do you want your community to look like? What do you want people to do? I mean, if they're in need of money now, do you think they're going to not be in need of money after they've been arrested and have a criminal record? Are they going to be able to find a job? What if they have mental health problems? I mean, would you rather they just get help, that someone prevent them from doing this in the future? I mean, this is where I think you have to think about community, right? I mean, what do you want your community to look like, and what do you want to contribute to make your community better? And a lot of the time that means not calling police, because it's just not the most helpful outcome. And I say that as someone who employs a team member who was in prison for 17 years. And I was previously married to someone who was in prison for many years. Both of them were convicted as teenagers. And I have seen the struggle, even for someone who then went and get a college degree, to ever find work again, because you have this record, right? Do you want to contribute to this? And as we saw with what DeRay was saying, making something a felony doesn't reduce that crime at all, because thieves are also thinking short term, right? They're thinking, what do I need or want right now? They don't think about the consequences. I'm sure the vast majority doesn't even know at what point something becomes a felony. They're not thinking about any of that. They're just thinking in the moment. So if you want to do things preventatively, making something a felony is likely not going to prevent anything, right? It just doesn't help. So I just want to encourage people to think long term is, how can you prevent this kind of thing, right? If someone steals baby formula, I mean, obviously, I don't think anybody wants someone to go to prison or be arrested for stealing baby formula, assuming they're not reselling. You also don't want, say, a small family-owned retailer like Kenny's ShopRite that only has a few stores to have to pay for other people to get that baby formula. I mean, is that reasonable? Probably not either, right? But what you can do is focus on, why do people need to steal to get baby formula in the first place, right? How can we tackle this problem? How can we ensure people are not in need? How can we fund programs that provide food and baby formula and whatnot to people in our community? And how can we as retailers contribute to that? I work with a lot of nonprofits to help fundraise. I mean, it comes down to community, right? And thinking long-term, how can you solve these problems structurally, which prison doesn't do? And coming from the Netherlands originally, we have a lot more community service programs when people commit minor crimes and whatnot, and we have a lower recidivism rate. So, you see that engaging people in the community, that is a way to tackle this, and just not trying to focus on punitive measures, but focusing on fixing problems that cause people to steal in the first place.
So
Wow.
to piggyback off of Claire, I think that that's how we live in community together is the heart of what restorative justice is. It is how do we do life together so just injustice does not occur, and then how do we address injustice when it does occur. And so it really is, that's why we see lower recidivism rates through restorative justice diversion programs than we do through the punitive legal system, because restorative justice is really focused on accountability, not punishment. So it's how do we do this accountability, how the harm that has caused, and do we build skills. It's really on not just the act itself of shoplifting, but what's the root cause and how can we address it. So that's where our program, with our assessment, if someone does come out as high risk for recidivating, we're able to have that conversation with that person of why they might have come out, why their assessment might have come out that way, what other needs do they have, can we connect them with other folks, is it an employment issue? A lot of times with our young adults specifically, that age group Tiffany had identified, it's jobs and finding a manageable, reasonable job, or financial management, money planning. How do you make a budget? A lot of our kids are coming out of high school not knowing how to budget. So they get a paycheck, they spend all their paycheck, and then, oh my goodness, I have to pay my phone bill or I have to buy groceries and I have no money. So that's really where the restorative aspect comes in, which is why I'm glad we have the laws on the book for alternative dispute resolution. But as Claire was saying, for these corporations, especially the big national corporations that don't allow us to do alternative dispute resolution, what is their corporate social responsibility to the communities in which the primary underlying cause of shoplifting is poverty? Are they investing in our local nonprofits? Are they investing in those? Because what we see is when someone goes through the punitive system, it only exacerbates that problem, because now, in addition to restitution, they're having to pay court fines and fees. If they do have a job, they're having to miss work to go to court. So it's one of these things where our legal system is actually set up in a manner that further causes the problem. It increases the problem of poverty, which then does not fix anything.
Something that really strikes me about this conversation too is the prevalence of no contact orders through the traditional criminal legal system. It's for any shoplifting, it's just a rubber stamp. When you're arrested, you're going to have an order that you can have no contact with that store while as a part of your bail conditions, and then it's rubber stamp that'll be part of your sentencing order. So it's so striking to me, Claire, that you're talking about, knowing or suspecting that a customer is shoplifting, but still seeing them as a customer and as someone who is a part of the community and you want to have a future relationship with. That it's really a striking dichotomy from the way our criminal system in Delaware is currently working for a traditional shoplifting case.
Meryem, if I can ask a question of either you or Tiffany, because I don't know that I know, are those no contact orders that are passed down through the courts indefinite and permanent bans? Because one of the things that we see through mediation or restorative conferencing is often the stores just want it for a year. At most, I think I've seen 2 years, and sometimes not at all, just until they finish their case. So I'm curious if that's less than what the court passed down into their contact orders.
Go ahead, Tiffany.
So no contact orders are routinely ordered at any bail hearing, just standard. So that's, from the time you're arrested until your case is adjudicated. And then on sentencing orders, typically a no contact order is again put in place. And that would be for as long as you're on probation or whatever the terms of your sentence are. So it would be the same. Typically, we're looking at a year of probation.
I'll add though that I would sometimes caution clients that if they go to the same store and the people who had been involved in their arrest are still working there, that it's something they should just be cognitive of, because if they're recognized, they're going to be watched differently. And I think for those things like Barbie, you were talking about with self-checkout scanners, which also make me very nervous. You're just in a position of risk going back into the same store, because I think a lot of stores don't have that mentality that Claire, you were talking about, um, of basically forgiveness after an indiscretion and valuing someone as a future customer. And of course, I don't know how much you've dealt with this, Barbie, but I've also seen stores do their own no contact orders because it's a private business and they can just choose to tell someone that they can't enter. It'd be trespassing. And of course, that kind of no contact order where it's just a private entity saying this is my private property and you can't come onto it, that can be indefinite.
Yeah, and that's often what we hear stores say as well. They're trespassed from us, or that's the terminology they use. They're trespassed for us, so we want to make sure that's included in the accountability agreement for them with you. But with that, that also creates difficulties for folks who are accused because, well, does that mean I can't shop online either, or do I just not shop there at all? I know I had one mother who their child was accused of shoplifting, and she was like, well, can he be in the car when I go into the store, or is he not even allowed in the parking lot? And the stores really have their own policies because it is their property. So it can be very confusing for folks who are trying to navigate the system.
Something we hadn't touched on, and this is something that DeRay, you might have stuff to add as well, is there's been a pretty noticeable rise for, I think, around the country, certainly in Delaware, of goods being locked away behind plexiglass. Especially going into like convenience stores, it's like hard to buy much of anything that without having to ask someone to unlock it for you. Are any folks on the panel able to talk about that trend or theorize why we're seeing that rise? I think that for a lot of folks, that is where this idea that there's a rise in crime is coming from, is just seeing things behind plexiglass and being inconvenienced.
I don't have anything about the plexiglass, but what I will say is that because we have the only database of the felony death thresholds, when legislators or activists call us in communities, it is almost exclusively because of media reports have risen. Like we can look and we'll like see on the news, it's like a smash and grab at a jewelry store, a luxury goods store, something like there'll be like a set of stories that just like all of a sudden popped up that become sort of the narrative, and then we're in the room being like, hey, like we staved off DC from raising their threshold, and it was like some smash and grabs that like just made everybody believe that this was like an epidemic and da 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 da. So the plexiglass thing, I think definitely is contributing people's sense of like what is going on. And you're like, if you got to lock up the cotton swabs, we are just in a bad, it's a bad moment, which highlights, what happens with poverty. But I do think the media, San Francisco, when they got Chesa out of there, it was like just a ton of relentless media reports, and the police and the Retailer Association suggesting it. It wasn't really like data or anything else.
If we have any journalists on the call, you heard it here. It's your fault.
Also, as a retailer, it strikes me as so ineffective because if you make it difficult for people to get things, they just won't get them. I mean, you're losing such massive amounts in sales that has to vastly outweigh the shrinkage that you have from loss, and probably vastly outweighs what it would cost to have one or two extra people, not security people, just regular staff members walking around engaging with people. If you think they're suspicious, confront them and say, hey, can I help you find something? Just in a friendly, not, I'm in a security outfit way. Doesn't cost that much to hire an extra retail employee. I'm pretty sure you lose more in sales from having those. I don't understand that strategy at all as a retailer.
Meryem, I was just gonna say, since DeRay brought up the smash and grab, which I think is what's on everyone's mind when they're talking about decreasing the limits. I just want to point out that when someone is breaking a window and entering a business and taking things, that is not what we're talking about. We're talking about shoplifting when someone goes in and takes something while the store is open and leaves with it. If you're breaking into a business, that's already a felony. That's already a burglary. That's already class, and that's regardless of what you're taking or if you're even successful in taking anything. So I just think that that's worth pointing out, since those are the sensational headlines. That's not what we're talking about here.
I think that's a really good point. It is really easy to equate these like violent images as just shoplifting when, as you stated, they're not.
Well, I
Oh,
think with
Trey, you're
that
on
though
mute.
too, it's also,
Oh,
I think with that too, there's something to be considered. Like we had a few folks that came in through our program who had burglarized a local nonprofit, a store. And when we met with everyone, it was one of those, they wanted something, they could have the store. There was one in place that would be easier to do that at night. But the planning took place the same day that they executed their plan. And in doing so, there was this lack of knowledge about the cost of the crime to the store and the actual mission of the store, that the store does do a lot of local community work as well as being a store. And so the store actually asked that they be able to do their community service. It was a group of young adults, do their community service at the store. They wanted to put them to work. And through that, we did a follow-up conference where all the parties got together, and the young people were very much like, I had no idea all the work that it went into running a store. I had no idea that like by me taking this for me, I'm also impacting all of this other stuff that you do. One of those young people is now employed by the store and has been for the last 2 years. So there is this, like, when we look at people as people, and we look at it as members of our community, like Claire does, there is a different lens to it. So it is that, what is the driving force behind it? How do we address the force behind it, whether it's burglary or retail shoplifting, whether it's shoplifting under the threshold for a felony or above the threshold of felony? I also have a case that was not in Delaware. It was actually across the line in Pennsylvania. So it didn't come through the Delaware Center for Justice, but through my restorative work outside of DCJ, where this young woman actually was going through she was to be hospitalized. She had some trauma when she was previously hospitalized. She had recently had a medication change, gained a lot of weight. So she was trying to buy clothing to wear during this hospital stay, but she didn't know what size to get. And she was so nervous about trying things on in the store that she just shoplifted several different sizes. So then it was, when she was caught, they thought she had the intent to sell the items. When in reality, when we were able to explain the mitigating circumstances, the court was a little more lenient on her. But it's one of those, if we don't ask the question, if we don't take the time to understand the reasons behind it, and we just have a blanket punishment for everyone, we're never actually going to change anything.
Yeah, what Barbie is saying really speaks to why things like community service are more effective and lead to lower recidivism, precisely because it helps people understand their own community, right? Just as we can take a moment to, learn to understand why somebody stole and how we can help prevent that, they also learn about you, right? They learn who you are as a person and what impact theft has on you. I mean, as a small store, even my employees didn't really think about it when I said, one book could wipe out an entire day of profit for us because your ultimate net profit is only about 5%. So just kind of letting people understand those things, right? Because someone shoplifting might think, oh, this only costs them, $10 to buy this book, so it's not a lot. It's like, yeah, but you got to sell a lot of books to make up for that again then, because you have so many other expenses. So it's a matter of helping people understand each other, understand their motives, and helping them understand what impact things have on the community.
You know, I was gonna just
And that's actually,
you first.
sorry, DeRay, one quick, and then it's all yours, I promise. One of the reasons we offer the shoplifting alternatives course through just to the courts for cases that don't come through us for diversion is for that very reason that Claire is stating, is that it educates on the impact. We at the Delaware Center for Justice do not get paid to offer that course. It is not part of our contract with the state. It is something we do because we know the benefit. And so that's us giving of our staff time and our resources to facilitate that course and taking that course because it addresses and educates people. Before I took the course, I had no idea, Claire, that one book could wipe out your day's profit. Like, that was something that I didn't even know as a highly educated individual before I went through the shoplifting course myself.
Yeah, I was just gonna say to Tiffany's earlier point about the misunderstanding about like what is actually happening, that like they see a smash and grab and you're like, that's not what we're talking about, is that one of the things that I've been just fascinated by is that when we work with legislators, almost always sort of behind the scenes and just like educating them, is that they literally know nothing. They don't know, they like don't know the statutes. They like saw the video, got freaked out. Somebody in their neighborhood sent an email being like da da da, and the newscasters don't know either. So like part of the work I think is like building people's capacity outside of the crisis. So they are like, oh, this is the difference between robbery and sort of basic larceny, and like people just don't know. And I've seen that hurt because they see the smash and grab and they're like, this is the thing. And you're like, that was already a thing. That has nothing to do with this.
Well, I know we wanted to reserve plenty of time for questions from folks that are here. I did have just like one wrap up. I think y'all have already largely addressed this, but what do each of you think the best tools for addressing shoplifting and retail crime are?
So I think that the best tools for youth and young people are the least intervention is best. So if we can send these cases to civil citation, which they're eligible for, which will divert kids from the criminal legal system, and instead have them interact with youth rehabilitative services in a different way, where youth rehabilitative services can assess their needs and maybe suggest counseling, or maybe have them do some community service, or if we can divert them after arrest to Barbie's program, those are the most effective ways to reduce recidivism. And as I said, most youth and young adult cases are impulsive and they're going to grow out of these behaviors. Most of the older adults that I've had as felony shoplifting cases are people with substance use disorder. And they are typically stealing to sell products to support their habit. So obviously, substance abuse treatment is going to be helpful there to reduce recidivism. But for the young people and the kids, it's got to be to keep them out of handcuffs and out of the courthouse.
And for that civil citation program, can you just give us a little bit more detail on that? It's different from the program that Barbie runs. And is shoplifting eligible? Is it mandatory that it go through? How does it work if a kid shoplifts?
So when the police are called, they have the option to refer the youth to the civil citation program. And so instead of an arrest, it's a referral to youth rehabilitative services, to YRS. It is a voluntary program. So the youth goes to YRS, and if they engage in the program and do what YRS has recommended based on their assessment, and again, that could be complete community service hours, that could be participate in counseling, or whatever intervention YRS deems necessary. If the child completes all of that, they're never arrested. They've never been inside the courthouse. There's no arrest record. There's nothing to expunge. If they are referred to civil citation and they are 12 or older and they do not complete civil citation, then an arrest can be made and the case can go through the legal system, that any other case would.
Okay, so it's like the earliest diversion possible, it sounds like. Nothing even to expunge afterwards.
Correct. And the law has changed a lot over the last couple of years for civil citation. Obviously, my office would love to see civil citation for youth for misdemeanor cases like shoplifting be mandatory. We haven't quite gotten there with it. But the newest iteration of the civil citation statute says that police have to at least consider it. And there is going to be some sort of a checkbox on DelGIS that they have to acknowledge that they've considered it. What I have found with officers when I'm representing youth at bail hearings and I call the officer to talk to the youth and I say, hey, this is a misdemeanor. It's a first arrest. Why didn't you refer it to civil citation? A lot of them don't know about it. So I think at least the newest iteration of the statute is going to help in the sense that they're going to actually have to check something, but it is just a checkbox and we would certainly like to see it be mandatory.
That's really good to know. What was my original question? Best tools for addressing shoplifting and retail crime.
I guess I can jump in because, of course, I'm going to say our great resource for preventing and addressing retail crime. And the major difference between us and civil citation is that our cases are generally court referred, so the kid does have a charge, the youth or the adult. Civil citation is also only available, as I know it, for kids, for youth, not for adults. Is that, yep, Tiffany's shaking her head, yes. But the difference, one of the major differences outside of just the criminal charge is that we actually include the victim voice as well. So we are actually in conversation with the state about the revamp to civil citation of how we can also help facilitate the victim's voice in civil citation processes as well. And make the course from the National Association of Shoplifting Prevention available to civil citation participants. So I think, again, reiterating the perspective change on seeing people as people, allowing us to be curious about the background behavior as to why this is occurring, what are kind of the root causes of the behavior, and then allowing for that educational and resources to be implemented. I love hearing when adults come back after taking the course saying, I never knew any of this, because we've been able to open their eyes to the impact. So I definitely agree with everything Tiffany said, that the lesser intervention, the better, but intervention that addresses root causes and educates them on the impact of their actions, and the residual effects of those actions.
The only thing, what I'd say is that what we found to be really helpful is to be really thoughtful about the examples that we use in these conversations, because what we find is we walk into rooms where people inadvertently talk about luxury items. Again, it's like Gucci, it is Apple, computer, like that is the narrative. And when people hear that, they're like, who, these kids are like, and you're like, they are stealing belts and baby formula and mouthwash. It's not, these are like really basic items. And I think that if we are really thoughtful about the examples, that actually does a lot of work for us. I think it is easier to talk about luxury items because it can get us to the dollar amount quicker, it can get us to the threshold quicker, but that is not actually how people are stealing. And the people who are stealing jewelry are breaking into places and smashing up stuff, and they're getting charged with a whole host of other things that actually are not the felony theft threshold. I say that in response to the legislator Gorman, who had a cute question in the thing, but I also think that that was like my big takeaway when we started to do our work.
And for business owners, I would say again, engage with your community, know who's there. I mean, on Market Street, I probably know most of the homeless here. I know which ones could be problematic, and I know which actually shop with us. There are people that as a small business, you might think, oh, I should probably refuse them because they're going to steal something. And it turns out they come in every day to buy, for example, chocolate bar, right? And they know us and they're happy to be there and engage with us. There's a guy that we help with his resumes and things like that. And he always comes in and says, I'm banned from a bunch of the stores around here. I don't know why he's banned, but he says, I'm banned from a bunch of the stores and you're the only ones who actually make me feel like I'm human. I'm always like, well, you are human, right? he's a super nice guy and he's always respectful. And why he's banned, I don't know, but I can imagine a lot of people just, judge people by how they look and don't consider that even somebody who is currently unhoused might actually be spending money in your store. And, if someone does steal something, find out why, get to know them and connect them with community resources. We have backpacks available that we can give if someone that comes in and they're probably not going to be a customer and we're worried that they might steal something. We can approach them and say, hey, if you are in need, here's a backpack with some basic resources. But now we'll have to ask you to leave. So, kind of in a gentle way, but give them something else that they can take instead that will help them out. And that's, it's on the micro level, just engaging with customers. And then on a macro level, as a business, engage with nonprofits in your community, try to support them if you can, co-host initiatives with them if you can, provide your business as a meeting space, for example. That's something that we do often. And, vote for policies that address mental health problems in your community, provide more resources for people with mental health. Vote for measures that, reduce poverty in your community, because those are the things that will ultimately help you. Don't vote for whatever lowers your taxes the most. Think long term.
Turning to audience questions, DeRay had mentioned one that was in the chat, but I want to elevate it and give others on the panel a chance to answer. We are privileged tonight to be with a state representative who put a question in the chat saying, I often hear a narrative from both colleagues and the public that, quote, it's not your mother's shoplifting, i.e. high value items are what now are stolen, which makes it more serious. The implication is that the people doing the stealing are somehow more genuinely criminals. I'd be curious to hear the panelists' thoughts about how to counteract this narrative.
By very far, the cheapest things are stolen the most from us. Stickers are like the cheapest thing we have, and they are by far the most stolen. High value items, we virtually never get stolen. I don't worry about them at all.
I haven't seen any cases of youth or young adults or even adults, and this is obviously anecdotal. These are just the cases that I've handled in the last 9 years at the public defender's office. I don't see luxury items being taken and someone being charged with shoplifting.
I think it's just like DeRay said, being mindful of the stories that we're telling and making sure that we are elevating the fact that it isn't those large items that are being taken, but it is more of the smaller things. And, having things like this that helps to get the message out there that our perceptions are not always accurate. And so what is the accurate picture?
And I think it's easy to assume that, shoplifters just want something really high value, but they often either want something they need or they take something impulsively. Like we said, they weren't really planning and they think, a sticker won't really harm this store, right? I mean, their intent isn't all that malicious. They just think it's small and it won't harm them. So it is those small items that get taken.
I'll add, in my experience too, it's always been not luxury items. Like it was frozen shrimp, shampoo, soap. It's often absurd, frankly, what people would take.
One brief, sort of funny example, we have some Kama Sutra cards that we sell. They're decks of Kama Sutra cards, and they have a funny sign next to them saying, please take a card and check it out, but don't try it out in the store. And oddly enough, one of those decks got stolen. And you know what they stole? They stole the open one of samples that wasn't even complete. So somebody really wanted to take it, and they didn't even steal the nice packaged one. They stole that one almost as a courtesy. If I really wanted this and I couldn't afford it, but I wasn't going to steal one of the closed ones. It's very odd, but
That's funny. There was a really good comment in the chat. This is from Olivia. Hi, Olivia. As a public defender, the times I usually see luxury items being taken are sometimes people who work for Amazon or UPS who just try to leave with an iPhone or five. But run-of-the-mill shoplifters aren't normally taking the big ticket items. This was something I know Barbie, in a conversation you and I had had, you mentioned this, that kind of the same thing that Olivia was talking about in the chat, that when we're talking about shoplifting, sometimes it's also employees, which is it's not as straightforward to address through things like legislation.
Yeah, it's not as always straightforward to address. It's often not charged as shoplifting, but theft. So that's a whole nother classification. Actually today, a young lady's case was dismissed. It was nully prossed because she was an employee at a store and she stole gift cards. She was financially strapped. Her mother was on a fixed income. It was just the two of them. And she found it was easy, it was accessible, which has brought me to question, I've seen store clerks working cash registers as young as 16. And we're talking about brain development and impulsivity. We know that the prefrontal cortex is not developed in a 16-year-old. So they are prone to risky, impulsive behavior. So are we also doing a disservice to them as a community by putting hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars in front of them as a cashier at a store? Is that really are we putting temptation right in front of them? All of the cases that I have received that are employees taking money out of a cash register or stealing gift cards, all of them in my 6.5 years with DCJ have been people between the ages of 16 and 20. So they've all been adults. And so it is one of those too, like talking to stores about policies. If I were a store owner, I would not be having a worker register. That is definitely something I would want. Has the brain development thing. Not because I don't trust all high schoolers. Certainly there are some that are trustworthy and could handle it, but it is a temptation and it is an unnecessary temptation to put before them.
We'd had a couple questions that people had submitted in advance. Thank you to everyone that did that. One of them, we briefly mentioned substance abuse being one of the big ticket factors that lead people to shoplift. Is anybody able to talk about, the question was, are we approaching retail crime driven by addiction and substance abuse differently from other motives?
I think it depends on specific cases, and it's always going to come down to the prosecutor and the defense attorney. So the defense attorney will send mitigation information. So that's information about the person who is charged that either tells us how we got here, what's going on in their lives. And I will say that a lot of prosecutors, if it is a substance use issue, are willing to negotiate pleas which contemplate treatment. I will say I have had cases of repeated shoplifting with adults. And there are some prosecutors who will want increased punishment on those cases. So while they may say, I want this person to get treatment, sometimes they're saying, I want this person to get treatment, in a level 5 facility, in a prison. So it really depends on the specific prosecutor that you're working with. But I think on a whole, most of them are looking to resolve a case in a way that keeps us from being back in the same situation with the same person.
Something I want to highlight for folks listening who might be unfamiliar, Delaware has a unified court system and a unified prison system. So we don't have local jails. Anytime someone is serving an incarcerated sentence in Delaware, they're in a state prison. And so people with really serious charges or really minor charges are all in the same facilities. Just something to note, because I think that's pretty different for Delaware. We had another question, which again is something that I'd heard some folks on here kind of touch on here and there. So this person had said, a number of folks in my neighborhood have been arrested for or had warrants issued for shoplifting. But then when they get to court, the stores don't show up and the cases just get dismissed. This is obviously anecdotal. So do we have any information about how often cases are dismissed because the store did not show up? It feels like a waste of police and judicial resources to have even made the arrest in the first place. This one just really struck me because I've done so many of these cases. It is a big thing with stores not showing up. Anyone want to take that one?
I would be happy to tell you that it's a waste of resources. I mean, I can't comment on percentages. I mean, I think we would have to get that information from Delgis. I don't, I suppose my office could try to break down the numbers of resolutions. But that's how a lot of shoplifting cases end. It ends on the trial date when the store doesn't appear.
I also know that's one of the reasons prosecutors like to refer to us, because they know the stores that aren't going to appear and the case is just going to get dropped anyways, and they'd at least like the person to have some kind of education so that they don't wind up back in court. And so that's where a lot of folks come to us. And I would say the majority of our shoplifting cases are just resolved for the shoplifting alternatives course, unless restitution is owed, and then restitution is also included. But the majority of the time, the stores have been able to acquire the items back because they've caught the person on the way out of the store. So no restitution is ordered, and it's just, or requested, it's just the sources they. So I say that it's very, from what I've heard, and again, anecdotal, don't have the numbers, that is very true, that if they don't show up and it's a misdemeanor case, that's not just true for shoplifting cases, that's also true for other misdemeanor cases and charges. That if the alleged victim in the case does not show up for a misdemeanor trial, that the case is just dropped.
I think something about this question, it struck me, some of the things, Claire, you had said about the amount of effort it takes for a store to be like on the lookout, like how to deal with shoplifting. And I think this speaks to what you were saying, Claire, that often like those conversations and those preventative like community building, it's less resources for the store than having someone sit in the courthouse for a whole morning, just to make sure the case doesn't get dropped.
Yeah, I'd rather talk to them if we can and see if we can get them help or something. I have, as of yet, never called the police on a shoplifter.
I think we also had a question come in about civil service fees. Anyone want to talk about what that is? What we're talking about? What are civil service fees and how does that work?
So from my understanding, and I'm not an attorney, but my understanding of civil service fees is that it's actually a fee that the stores charge to someone accused of shoplifting in order to cover their cost, supposedly to cover the cost of their employees who had to intervene with the individual, who might have to show up to court. In restorative conferencing mediation, this used to be a thing where stores would ask for the civil service fee within mediation, where it's very much, it's civil, it's not criminal. So this is something ultimately the stores could potentially sue the individual for, and they would ask for that. And so they roughly were about $150 is what we would usually see. So this is a fee that they're trying to get the defendant, the person accused of shoplifting, to pay. Often it comes in a letter from an attorney from anywhere in the country. That basically says, like, you have to pay this fee or else. And so often folks will pay it not knowing that they have an option to try to fight it or not pay it. In the state of Delaware, we have worked very hard to address civil service fees so that they are not cumbersome. As we stated before, a large reason for shoplifting is poverty. This only exacerbates that issue. So in restorative conferencing, we have said to stores that civil service fees are not something we're willing to include in an accountability agreement, that we are only, because you're not going to court, and so you're not having to send someone, we are not willing to include that in the account agreement. But of course, if you are out money because of items taken that were not returned or items that were returned damaged, that we can ask for. So we in restorative conferencing do not include civil service fees, but cases that go through the traditional legal process sometimes can. And sometimes folks pay it just because they're scared.
That was my most common experience, is people paying it because they were scared. And I always I have a lot of questions about that whole system, because it isn't, my understanding is it's not tracked anywhere when a store has done that, since it's a civil settlement demand letter essentially. And so I sometimes saw where they would send the civil settlement letter, the person would pay it, but then they would still prosecute and ask for restitution. And there's no tracking. So it was often, and it's being done by corporate to do the civil settlement, and then it's the local franchise that's doing the prosecution. So it's not like if there was I don't think it was necessarily insidious by the local store folks. They might not even know that that had happened, but unless the defendant brought it up, no one knew that that happened. And I think some stores were often double recovering because of those civil settlement letters. Well, I think, let's see. Any other questions in the chat? Have I missed anything? Oh, this is a good one. How can accountability be built into loss prevention practices so that asset protection teams don't unfairly target minority youth? Something we hadn't really talked about yet on this panel is race discrimination as a big part of what happens in these cases. Anyone want to tackle this question?
I can take it, I guess. So restorative justice is all about accountability. How do we do accountability? How do we do it well? And what I've seen is a few different things. One, making sure that asset protection teams are trained on implicit bias and aware of their own implicit biases. So like Claire was talking about, she sees an unhoused person as a person. Making sure that they're not judging people just because of how they look as they're entering the store and assuming that there's something they might not be. So making sure that asset protection teams are having regular training on implicit bias and aware of their own implicit biases, but then also policies, making sure that the stores have adequate policies that say something to the effect of, you stop a person, if they say that they did not see an item and are willing and offer to pay for it, allow them on the first time. If it happens a second time, then proceed with other avenues. So making sure that those policies are in place. We cannot hold people accountable to expectations unless those expectations are written into policy. So even though it might be an unspoken thing in a large corporate store that, oh, we just know as asset protection folks, we let them go the first time, but then the next time we make sure that charges are filed. If that's not written, that allows for folks to just not follow it. And so it just depends on the asset protection manager that catches the person that day. So making sure that they have good policies in place and that implicit bias training.
Yeah, and here education is important for retailers as well, right? I mean, educating retailers on what the consequences are of actually filing charges against someone. How could this impact them long term? How does this impact your community? How are certain minority groups disproportionately affected by these things? You know, what happens, 20 years down the road if you routinely press charges against people for really minor things and more people end up with felony charges? It's just a matter of being aware of what the long-term consequences are of your actions. And that's true for retailers as much as for the person who's stealing.
Well, I think we're getting right back to the top of the hour. So just to wrap things up, panelists, any closing remarks you want to make? Anything that's been on your mind, you wish you'd gotten a chance to say it?
Just want to
Well,
thank
good.
everybody for attending and for helping to raise awareness and just better understanding of what's happening and what we can do.
Well, thank you so much to each of you for being here. Thank you to our co-sponsors, Delaware Center for Justice, YWCA Delaware, and Tide Shift Justice Project. Thank you to everyone in the audience for coming. We will send around materials afterwards. Hope everyone has a wonderful evening. And take this stuff back. Let all your retailers know that it's not quite how the news makes it out to be. Thank you all for a great night, and yeah, take care, everyone.